Hi, I'm Roy from Roy's Garage. Today I'm going to be working on a 2001 Nissan Frontier two-wheel drive 2.4 liter automatic. I'm going to show you how to replace the front pads, calipers, rotors, hoses, grease the front bearings, and put new seals. These are the tools I'm going to be using today to do this job. A hood prop, rubber mallet, ball peen hammer, half-inch impact wrench, 14mm socket, vice grip, side cutters, long nose plier, 3/8 ratchet, 11mm socket, 19mm wrench, 14mm wrench, 10mm wrench, 10mm tubing wrench, flat tip screwdriver, 2 different size water pump pliers, dust cap removal, Phoenix brake flusher, air gun, brake clean, bottle of water with a hole in it, suction ball, bearing packer, wheel bearing grease, and my seal installer. These are the parts I'm going to be using today to do this job. Front rubber brake hoses, front pads, .3 brake fluid, inner wheel bearing seals, front rotors, and front calipers. Okay, so I turned the wheel all the way to the right so it's easier to see. So now with my vice grip, I'm going to pinch off the brake hose. So I'm going to be removing the brake hose from the caliper. So I'm going to be removing the caliper. There's 2 bolts, one here and one there. Okay, the reason why we're changing all of this is because the caliper, these pistons are frozen. It cannot go back in. So as the brake heats up, it starts to expand. Everything starts to expand. Next thing you know, your brakes, this brake is start to apply. And the hotter the brake get, the more the brake pad is going to apply. Next thing you know, it starts dragging, and next thing you know, it was smoking. So that's why we're going to be replacing all of this. So we're going to be removing the pad. So I'm going to be removing the caliper mount. It's mounted on with 2 bolts. So this is a 19mm bolt. You're gonna notice there's gonna be 2 different lengths, so the longer one is gonna go on the top. Okay, so I'm gonna be removing the whole hub assembly because the rotor is actually bolted to the back of the hub. So I'm gonna be removing the dust cap. Removing the cotter pin. Okay, so removing this nut. Okay, removing the outer bearing and pulling out the hub. Okay, so I'm going to be removing the inner seal. So I'm going to be using a brass punch, and I'm going to be punching the inner race of the inner bearing, and I'm going to be hammering it down. when I'm pounding the bearing, I'm actually pounding it right on the inner part of the race, and that knocks out the seal. So first I'm going to be cleaning out all this old grease from in the hub. Just clean it out the best you can. Okay, that should be good enough. So we're going to be just cleaning up this spindle. So I'm going to be removing this hub from the rotor. So there's 6 bolts I got to remove with a 14mm socket and my 1/2" drive impact. Looks like this guy is rusted on. What we can do is put a block of wood like right underneath the hub, and then I'm going to be pounding the rotor to get it off. So I'm going to be bolting up my new rotor to the hub. So I'm going to be tightening it up. So I'm going to be putting some grease into my hub. You don't need too much, just enough to just coat it so it doesn't rust. Okay, I'm going to put a little grease on my spindle, just enough so it doesn't rust. So I'm going to be packing this bearing with grease. So just wipe it up. That should be good enough. So now I'm going to be putting it in my bearing packer. Put it right in here. Put this on. Now I'm going to stand on it. And then the pressure is going to push the grease right through the bearing. So that's good. So what it just did was it just flushed out the bearing. Okay, so I'm going to be putting the bearing in my hub. So I'm going to be installing my new seal. And I have a seal installer right here that fits right in here. And I'm going to hammer it down. Make sure this guy goes in straight. So I'm going to be cleaning my rotor using some brake clean. Get off all the oil and grease. Okay, so now I'm going to be installing my hub on the spindle. So now I'm going to grease the outer bearing the same way I did the inner bearing. Just wipe it down. Putting in the bearing. Wiping down my washer. putting on my nut. So I'm going to be tightening up this nut. Just kind of spin it a little. And then when you tighten it, you just want to make it snug. You don't want to really over tighten it. Kind of like around there. Just put a little preload on the bearing. So I'm going to put this guy on. Put my cotter pin in. So I'm going to be cleaning out my dust cap. Putting in some grease. All you need is a little just to coat it so it doesn't get rusty. Put it on and just tap it in. So this is the new caliper. I'm going to be taking it apart. So I'm going to be putting on my new shims on the caliper mount. These guys don't fit too good. So we're going to have to probably bend some of these tabs so the thing can lock in. So these pins, it should be lubricated from the factory, so it feels real nice and smooth. So I'm going to be putting on some ceramic grease on my shim. Now I'm going to be installing the caliper mount. Okay, so we're going to be putting on the caliper mount. So we're going to be tightening up these bolts. So I'm going to be putting on the pad. On this pad there's a wear indicator and it goes on the inside, and the wear indicator goes on the leading edge. So on this rotor it's turning counterclockwise, so we're going to have to put this wear indicator on the bottom. So now I'm going to be putting ceramic grease on the inside of this pad. Just put a little bit, rub it on. So now I'm going to be greasing up my caliper. So we're going to be bolting it up. Okay, so I'm going to be installing my hose, but first we're going to make sure this piece can go right into this slot, because sometimes, you know, these things, you know, they throw them around, then they rebuild them, then they sell them back to you. Sometimes this thing closes up, so this piece will not go right into the slot all the way. And then when you tighten it up, this thing is actually going to be sitting at an angle, and it's going to spring a leak. So you got to make sure that this piece fits right into this slot comfortably. If not, then you might have to just file it to open up the hole so this thing can go through. So this guy is good. It goes right in, no problem. So we're gonna be putting on some new washers. This came with the caliper, and we're gonna be putting on the hose. And just make it tight. Okay, so I'm gonna be disconnecting the old hose from this tubing. So gotta release this lock. Okay, so I'm gonna be unscrewing the hose. Screwing the new hose back on. So this thing actually fits in a slot, so you gotta kind of like turn it and fit it. And put the lock in. And just tap it in. Okay, we're going to be tightening up this nut. So now we're going to be gravity bleeding the caliper. So remove this rubber plug. So open up the bleeder screw. And let gravity push the air out. So now the fluid is coming out of my bleeder screw. So give this caliper a couple taps. In case there's any air bubbles in it, it's going to break it up and come out. Okay, so now we're going to lock it up. So I'm going to be sucking out the brake fluid from my master cylinder. Suck out as much as you can. Okay, so now I'm going to be pumping fresh fluid from the caliper up to the master. So with my Phoenix brake flusher, I'm going to be pumping fresh fluid from the caliper up to the master. So we're going to be opening up the bleeder screw. I'm going to be pumping some fresh fluid. So I'm going to be sucking out the brake fluid again. So I'm going to be filling up my master. Okay, so I'm going to start up the vehicle. I'm going to be pumping my brake pedal up and down, no more than halfway, until I feel pressure. Okay, that feels good. Now I'm going to pressurize the brake system. So I'm going to be using my hood prop, one side against the brake pedal and the other side against the seat. So I'm going to be opening up my bleeder screw, checking for air. Okay, we'll try it one more time. I'm going to pressurize my brake system again. Okay. Pressurizing the system again. Okay, so opening up the bleeder screw. That looks good. No air. So we're going to lock it up. Got some water. Shoot them on my bleeder and this hose connection. And this guy. So we're going to be blowing it down with air. Okay, so I'm going to pressurize the system again. Okay, so we're going to be holding it for about 15-20 seconds and then check for leaks. So now we're going to be checking all my connections right here. That looks dry. The bleeder screw looks dry. And this end, this connection, it looks dry. They're all good to go. So that's how you replace front brake pads, calipers, rotors, hoses, grease front wheel bearings, and install new seals. If you have any questions, comment below. Make sure to subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and I see you in the next video. Aloha.